Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Cedar Falls Board of Education with a reminder that the actions taken at this table will focus on our students and their achievement. Item B on the agenda is the appointment of the board secretary. Do I have a motion to appoint Danelle Goneman as district secretary? It can be just a verbal motion.
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Eric Giddens. Any questions or comments?
Welcome.
Welcome. For sure.
There you go.
Thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. I'm going to swear Danelle in right now. You can raise your right hand. Danelle, do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge the duties of the office of School Board Secretary in the Cedar Falls Community School District, Cedar Falls, Iowa, as now and hereafter required by law?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we need to appoint the authorized school business official. Do I have a motion?
Yes, I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education approve the appointment of Danelle Goneman as the authorized school business official for the Cedar Falls Community School District.
Thank you, Jeff. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Welcome, Danelle. Thank you. All right, moving on now to item D on the agenda, the public hearing. I have in my possession an affidavit of publication showing that the notice of time and place of hearing for the 2019 roofing projects. This notice was published in the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier on January 16th, 2019. The board will now hold a hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward to the mic to speak about the roofing projects? Hearing and seeing none, then we will close this hearing. Moving on now to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by Eric. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Jenny. Any questions or comments?
We have one addition. There is a human resource report at everybody's desk because we do have an addition to that HR report. And I think it's with sadness that Mr. Conrad has announced his intent to retire at the end of this school year. And I think Adrian put together just a short statement to read on behalf of Dan and some of his information.
As Dr. Pattee has indicated, Mr. Dan Conrad, Director of Secondary Education, has indicated his intent to retire effective June 30th of 2019, completing a 39-year career in public education in Iowa. Mr. Conrad joined the district as Director of Secondary Education in July 1999, having served previously as an English and speech teacher in Charles City, and subsequently as an associate principal and then high school principal in Webster City. During his tenure in Cedar Falls, the grade 7-12 secondary education program has indeed flourished. For example, partnerships have been developed with post-secondary institutions which have resulted in a significant number of students earning post-secondary credit while simultaneously meeting the requirements to graduate from Cedar Falls Community School District. There's been an expansion in the number of subjects made available to students for advanced placement study. There's been development of a comprehensive range of supports for at-risk students with a 2017-18 high school graduation rate of approximately 97%, a number which is among the highest in the state. An expansion of both extracurricular activities and extracurricular athletic offerings, and the recruitment, selection, and development of capable administrators in each of our district secondary buildings. Mr. Conrad's leadership impact has also been felt district-wide. Working with prior Superintendent Dr. David Stokes and subsequently Solution Tree Incorporated, he was instrumental in planning and implementing teacher professional learning communities, also known as PLCs, and collaborative teams, which have fundamentally changed the district's approach to instruction, student learning, and professional development. He has chaired the district's safety committee, with oversight responsibility for district responses to various kinds of emergencies. In 2013-14, he spearheaded the development and drafting of the district's first 5-year instructional technology strategy and implementation plan. That plan underwent revision and updating in the 2017-18 school year. And he has been closely involved with the planning and implementation of computer programming into the K-12 curriculum. In 1988, a professor at UNI wrote in a reference letter, and I quote, "I believe he, Mr. Conrad, has exceptional potential as a secondary school principal." When Superintendent Dr. Dan Smith hired Mr. Conrad in 1999, he clearly believed that he had the potential to be a highly capable district-level leader. The examples I've provided are illustrations that Mr. Conrad has fully applied his talents and fulfilled the potential that Dr. Smith saw. The students, staff, and indeed the entire Cedar Falls community have benefited greatly as a result. As a colleague, Mr. Conrad has been knowledgeable, insightful, and a supportive partner, always seeking the greater good and representing the district not only locally, but at the state level in a way which has enhanced our tradition of excellence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Dan.
Congratulations, Dan. Any other comments or questions? Dan, you're going to be greatly missed. Just like I said to Doug, I feel like you have always been an advocate for this board and always been very supportive of us. And you know, you have an opportunity to see us at the table, but in other situations too, throughout the community and throughout the school district. And you have always given us the guidance that we need when we've called to ask questions, if our superintendent's not available, and just have always appreciated appreciated you as a role model for us. So I can't thank you enough, and you will be greatly missed.
Thank you, I appreciate it. It's been a great run, I know that. A wise man once told me, though, after 20 years, you've outstayed your welcome, so I'm getting out after 20 years. It's been a great place, not only to work, but to raise a family. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I suppose we should vote.
No.
No? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on now to public comment. We've not
have
been
any
approached.
questions.
Okay. Secretary's financial report. Danelle.
Okay, we'll bring that up. We'll be reviewing November and December actually this month. So in regards to, go ahead and we'll start with general fund. So for the general fund, we had $4.4 million in revenue. We also had expenditures of 5.0, leaving us a balance of 8.3 in our fund balance and availability in November. We'll go ahead and transition to the next. In our management fund, we had a revenue of $40,000, expenditures of $5,000 with a remaining balance of $766,000. Our next is our capital projects. As you know, this will be dwindling down as we continue to finish up with Aldrich and North Cedar and Orchard Hill. We had just revenues, which is interest of $1,800. We had expenditures of $879,000, which leaves us a balance of $358,000. Our next is our save, which we had revenues of 1.4. We had expenditures of 1.1. As a reminder, we do have a transfer out of that, which goes into our debt service of $218,000, which leaves a balance of 9.5. Just as a reminder, $995,000 is restricted, so the unrestricted is 8.5 availability. Our next is our PEPL. We had $237,000 in revenue. Our expenditures were $256,000, which left us with a balance of 3.6 in our PEPL fund. In our debt service, You'll see the revenue of $160,000. You'll also see that transfer in that I was discussing in regards to our lot of the $218,000. We had no expenditures because those are paid twice a year, which will be coming up in our December, you'll see, which gives us a balance of $2.6 million available. Our next is our student activity. We had revenue of $119,000. We had expenditures of $160,000, which available balance was $541,000 for our student activity. You'll also see for our trust and agency funds, revenue of $6,000. Expenditures were the $20,000, which left us an ending balance of $236,000. We get to our food service nutrition, which is revenues of $285,000 for the month of November. Expenditures were $241,000 with remaining balance of $750,000. And we then finish up with our coffee shop, which is revenue of $1,000, expenditures of $1,800, and a balance of $4,799. Oh, we have one more. We have our River Hills, which is our revenue. As you know, that's a flow through that was due to the Central Rivers AEA. So our revenue, we did have some of $320,000. No expenditures at this time, but we will see some in December, and then which obviously leaves a balance of $320,000. Any questions for November?
Questions?
Okay. We can then go on to December, and we'll be able to review December rather quickly as well. And we can go ahead. So a general fund again, our revenue was 3.6. We had expenditures of 5.4 this month, which we had an ending balance of 6.4. In our management fund, 19,000 in revenues. Our expenditures were 0, so we had a balance of 785,000. In our capital projects again, the revenue was the interest of $756. We had a few expenditures of 13,000, remaining balance of 346,000. In our save, again, we had revenues of 430,000. We had our expenditures of 205. Again, we had that transfer out of 218,000, which left us a remaining balance of 9.5. Again, we have that restricted balance, so really our available balance is the 8.5 million. For our PEPL, we had revenues of 112,000, expenditures of 26,000 for December, and a remaining balance of 3.7. For our debt service, we had 70,000 for revenue. Again, we had that transfer in from our save of 218,000. This was the time of the year where we do have expenditures. So we had $745,000 in expenditures with the remaining balance of 2.1 million. In our student activity, we had revenue of 101,000. Expenditures were 53,000 with a remaining balance of 589,000. In our trust and agency funds, again, we had 2,000 in revenue, expenditures of 24,000, ending balance of 215,000. For our nutrition, we had revenues of 145,000. Our expenditures were 238,000, which left us an ending balance of 657,000. In our coffee shop, revenues of about $1,200, expenditures of $650, which left us with a balance of $5,426. And we'll finish up with River Hills again, which we had revenues of $356,000, expenditures of $430,000, and then an ending balance of $246,000. Is there any questions for December?
One quick question. So the general fund versus last year were about $1 million lower. Is that
We
just
were.
timing issues?
It is timing issues, yes.
Okay.
Yes, with the expenses that came in, so it was timing issues.
Okay.
And I think it's important to denote, too, that our save account, that shows about $8.5 million. When we did our elementary bonds and our work at our elementaries, we knew that the bond coverage wasn't going to cover all of the costs with the elementary work. So we set that up, that there would be about $7 to $8 million coming out of that save account dedicated to those elementary projects. So that was set up originally knowing that that was going to inflate with cash balances, but also over time start coming back down because of those payments for North Cedar and Orchard Hill especially.
Any other questions? If not, we'll put the November and December Secretary's financial report on file for audit. Thank you, Danelle. Moving on now to communications. Marika
Wasn't able to be here this evening. She is with the Rocket Club with some different activities, so we aren't going to be able to have a student rep update this evening.
So Janelle will fill that lovely time with everything that's
I
exciting.
will fill that time. So for the communications report tonight, I'm going to go through a little bit the website that we've put together as far as information in regards to the high school facilities and the different pieces that can be found there for those in the community that are interested. You can get to that website location under it's cfschools.org. You go to About Us and then CFHS Facilities Information. The tabs across the top, this will continually be updated over the next months as we get new questions, as there's new information to share, but this is really kind of the hub is where we're going to put most of the information and presentations as far as information and background with the high school facilities. Under the data piece, oh yes, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. Are we tracking site visits to the site?
Yes.
And
Yep,
have
we'll be able
you-
to track site visits.
How have you, traffic, are we getting?
It's been quite high. You know, we launched this right before the survey went out. So the great thing was that people were able to get to this from the survey when they got the email with the links, and then they could also go to the survey right from this site. So it's had high traffic to this point. You know, it's definitely taken a dip in the past 5 days, but before that we had quite a few visits over the time. So yeah, we can are definitely tracking that. We go to the data piece, there's lots of information here and kind of some specific ones we really wanted to highlight a little bit tonight. This one just shows the anticipated expansion of Cedar Falls. And you can, when you go to the website, you can click on these and then download and then zoom in closer, or you can get the full PDFs to download as well to get closer. But this just shows on the right is where the original high school and where Cedar Falls was really expanding when it was built in the 1950s. Today, and then where it is going into the future. So I'm going to go through the rest of this pretty quickly, but there's a lot of information under this data tab. This shows enrollment, growth in Cedar Falls. We also have a lot of information in regards to the possible expenses as we look at the possibility of moving forward with construction of the high school. And as the years change, those costs will go up. So this just illustrates that for people in the community. This is the full presentations that can be downloaded as PDFs. It's all been changed, so there's now, people were having some challenges in regards to this because of some Google, it's a Google site, so we had to change some specifications, but now everyone should be able to access that without any problem in regards to these presentations. So that's all under the data piece. There's also, we feel like really important to let people know about the why this is really important for us right now. And it's not just about updating air conditioning and heat, but it's a bigger picture for us. So this is an interview with a high school student after she went through the Insight Week process. And she talks a lot about the piece as far as the pride that students should be able to have in their building and how that's not really felt at the high school, and that can kind of feed into the culture. And there's also a lot of comparisons under this why. This shows the kind of big 4 pieces that we're looking at: the security features, the improved accessibility, flexible learning spaces, and the improved teaching environment. But we also go on to show a lot of pictures of some very recent high schools that have been built in the state. So this shows some photos of Johnston that just opened a year and a half ago, their high school. This also shows some pictures of Johnston. There's also a link to look at Liberty High School, which was the 3rd high school built in Iowa City. So there's lots of information here and some comparisons that people can look at. Also under that why is kind of a video tour of the current high school facilities that you can go through and look at. And we'll be announcing soon opportunities for people to come to the high school and have tours of the building in person. And we're putting together some actual video tours as well. We have an FAQ also. This is kind of some of the most common questions we've been getting. What are the needs? What would happen if we didn't address the needs at the high school, the impact of the SAVE. about the community voting on it. One of the important pieces here is definitely those newer high schools that have been built in the community, and more importantly, the bond votes that those communities had and those dates. So Iowa City had a large bond vote that was passed in September of 2017. It was 191 million. That was for multiple projects. So that was not just for the high school they built. They built Liberty High School to start out as a smaller facility, but to grow into a larger high school. Waukee, that 117 million is just for the high school, the second high school they're building. That was in February of 18, and then Ames had their approval for their bond vote for a new high school, which was 110 million last April. And then we've definitely had, as the survey went out and people have been giving input, some fair amount of questions in regards to the location. So this tab goes into more depth about the location, the process that went into purchasing that land from UNI, and really the whole process and why it really was the best choice. Talks about the partnership offerings with UNI, utilizing the green spaces. Safer parking is definitely an improvement with that location. The map on the right shows the Green Hill extension coming around and intersecting with West 27th Street, and talks about the traffic flow there. And we'll definitely be talking more about the location as we move forward with this process, with even some video FAQs and things like that to talk about any concerns people in the community have with that. This also goes through the whole PowerPoint that Dr. Petit presented in regards to the land purchase, so a couple years ago. But it has all the comparisons of the other locations that were looked at and compared with in the community. And then another tab, the tax rate and tax base information. So this has kind of that information as far as Cedar Falls comparisons in regards to the state and other school districts. Also has the levy rate information, our city levy rate, and then the building permit valuations as those have continued to grow year after year. There's also some charts as far as showing where Cedar Falls lands within the tax rate of the 25 largest school districts. So that shows us third from the bottom with the elementary bond vote approval. And then this also shows the 25 largest school districts' average total property tax rate. So as you can show, Cedar Falls is in the blue. The largest 25 school average is in the red, and it goes from 2009-10 to 2018-19. So you can see how our tax rate is definitely on the low end of compared to those 25 schools. And this shows where really the breakdown of that as being the third lowest of the top 25. We even go on to talk about the current high school construction history as far as being built in 1950, and then the multiple additions that have been added onto over the years. And then reuse of the current high school is an additional tab where we talk about the possibility of the current high school being reused as the administration building off First Street, the IT facility off Cedar Heights being sold, combined into the current high school location, and then how the city of Cedar Falls is interested in partnering with us with the rec facility of the primarily really utilizing those spaces that have been renovated at the front of the building that you can see from Division Street. Before I move on to all the other great things happening, are there any questions with that? I covered a lot.
Can I just make two suggestions or
Of course,
questions?
please
One
do.
is when you talked about how this can impact the teaching environment. I don't know if we can call it teaching/learning environment, because as much as it's going to impact our teachers and how they teach, it's going to impact how our students learn.
Definitely.
And because this is just something that we're going to be talking a lot about, is there any way to have it, the button or the link to that, maybe be more accessible on the front page? 'Cause
Yes.
It's kind of buried in
It
there.
is kind of buried. I will add it to the homepage as a link. We have kind of those rotating things as the top things, so I'll add that to the link.
That'd be great.
Take off the preschool and add that. It's a great suggestion. But as you hear things, as you have conversations with people, if there's things that you think we need to add to it, please let me know. And as we go through the survey and responses, we're definitely going to be looking at that to see what are the gaps of information we need to add into it. So I don't know if you had anything else to add. Dr.
No, we've had a lot of comments that people appreciate the amount of information that was there, the clarity of information that they could really dig into and gather some things that might not have been known, or some misperceptions that are out there about some different things. So it's really well put together, a lot of information there. We encourage people to go and look at it, because it really truly is focused on how do we enhance our learning opportunities for our students, but also for the growth of our community and our school district as we look to the next 50 to 70 years.
Yeah, and we're also, over the next couple of months, we're going to really try to share information as far as the perspectives from the students and the teachers of how it will kind of change how, the tough part for the teachers is, they don't realize how different it could be, but Aldrich, those teachers really already know how different it can be and how enhanced it can be. So we've got some of those pieces that we'll be sharing as well. All right, we can move on then to some of the other announcements. The Iowa High School Press Association named the high school newspaper, broadcast, and yearbook students as the top high school journalism staff again this year. So a big congratulations to those students and especially their advisor, Brian Winkle. He is a driving force behind those students and the high quality work that they do year after year. This was just an announcement that came last week. The American School Counselor Association announced Pete Junior High as a recognized ASCA model program. So this was a years in process designation that was really driven by Becky Lenz at Pete Junior High. She's a school counselor there. So we definitely wanted to congratulate Becky and, of course, Pete Junior High for this designation. They'll be recognized this summer at a conference. And this is not a small thing to accomplish, as I understand, but is a really, really big undertaking. So congratulations to them. Also wanted to mention, we kind of mentioned the naval designations by Grassley, but we also just found out that 53 students from Iowa were named U.S. Presidential Scholars, so Astoria Chow and Alex Glasscock were named to that list. So congratulations to those two. And then also to Dara Holstein and Marika Yang on their nominations to the U.S. Naval Academy. Senator Grassley nominated 33 Iowa students, 2 from Cedar Falls. We also wanted to mention the high school girls golf coach, Megan Yunkett, was named the 2017-18 Iowa Coach of the Year by the National Federation of State High School Associations. Under her guidance, they've made 3 consecutive trips to the state tournament and won the 5A state championship in 16 and 17 and finished 4th last year. So big congratulations to Megan Yunkett, and she would just love it if everybody would just tell her congratulations. All of you watching, make sure to post on Facebook to let her know. Also, just wanted to mention real quick, we had the next group of CAP students started, and they did their design sprint last week. So they did a project that was actually with Cedar Falls Main Street in regards to designing the large sign banners that hang on the light poles. So they did that at Central Rivers and then also at Mudd, where they were able to utilize those facilities and do that work. And Orchard Hill moves in soon. This is just a quick photo of the gym kind of being finished up. The lunchroom area, and so the windows there look out onto Round Street. And this is one of the collaborative areas. And that's all. That's all. That was a lot. You can check everything out also on the social media. Any questions?
Questions for Janelle? Thank you, Janelle. Okay. Ready for the facility update?
Yes,
All right,
yes.
Mr. Lieber.
We're
Welcome.
excited to have Brad here and continue to talk about the facility needs, especially at the high school level, and kind of the next steps and iterations with that work. So thank you.
All right, thanks for having me tonight. We continue to have a community conversation that we've been having over the last year. And that conversation is about kind of the current status of what education looks like at Cedar Falls, but also what's possible, kind of looking into the future. So we've been to you a couple times here to present, and I'm going to go over those briefly and kind of recap for those that haven't seen it and are watching online. I would say the more detailed views are online on the YouTube channel for the district if people want more information. And there's certainly a lot of this is pulled into the website as well. So we started with gathering a team, and we've been working with Story Construction, who's been working on some costing for the different options that we've been looking at. And then David Jake's Design, who's an international, really educational consultant that has helped us kind of with engagement of staff and students, and just does a really great job as we've gone through. So with that, I'd prefer this as a conversation and not a presentation. So if you have questions as we're going through, let's just give me a nudge or something. So we talked about process, and everyone wants to start with designing, and it's really hard for architects not to design and really to put the pencil down. And we started with really asking questions and asking the why we're going to do what we're going to be doing. So this is a pretty standard process, but really started with some questions, not answers, and we had a survey that went out to staff. We got 100% participation. We had a student survey that was led by one of the CAP students, and we got some really great information there. In summary, I would say that a lot of things have changed in education. We're succeeding in a lot of ways, but overwhelmingly the staff believe 75 to 80% that the changes in education are really being limited by the spaces that they're in today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through, but that was very consistent across all the questions that we heard. The students are learning in different ways. You know, they have the iPhones that are very engaging, addictive, maybe some would say, and they want an engaged form of learning. So there's a lot of things that are changing, and again, what we heard from them is the building doesn't support in its current state what those goals are. And simple things like lockers. We found that 75% of students don't use their lockers, and more interestingly, 50% didn't know where their lockers were in the building. So just little things like that. It's kind of a silly piece, but it's influential, I think, and meaningful in terms of what how the building changes. So we started the process by meeting some community leaders, and then what we call Insight Week, and that was we were on campus for 4 days, impacting and interviewing a broad constituent of people, from city staff to the university to staff to students to groups, clubs, and we met with over 250 people in 4 days, and the goal was really to come to a consensus about what the current state was and what's the future of education for Cedar Falls. What's the Cedar Falls way? So that was very helpful. We had 3 days of school lunch, I think, in a row, so that's good. Some salads. So good discussion. Some of the most interesting pieces were just watching. We sat in classes and saw how teaching was happening. We watched as students passed classes and how that looked, and we saw a lot of congestion and a lot of students that maybe weren't engaged, that were rushing the course, except my student who I found 5 minutes after the bell rang, hanging out in the hallway. So we want to look broadly at, it's easy to think about the high school as a newer version of today. It's just a shinier kind of new version of what we have. And overwhelmingly, what we heard from the community was that they really wanted something different, and they really wanted to discover kind of how this might, this renovation addition or new building might impact kind of teaching and learning in a very broad way. And also that it really wanted to be used as a community asset more than the existing building is. So those were some goals that we had. So these are what we call drivers. These are broad goals of what we heard from the community. I would say broadly what we heard was that they're interested in what other people are doing, Johnston, Waukee, Ames, Ankeny, Iowa City, but they really wanted to discover what the Cedar Falls way is. And that's what some of this is about, and that's what that listening is about. And so we talked about connectivity. The existing building is very siloed right now. It has a lot of individual spaces that are not really connected. And so we talked about the power of those connections and how that might happen. We talked about, we call it community and co-location, but how does the community come into the building, use it? How do we dual use spaces? Right now the building is very much kind of single use in a lot of ways, and that's not untypical for traditional schools. And then a diversity of spaces. We have a lot of the same kinds of spaces at the existing high school. We have a lot of 850 square foot classrooms that have a corridor in between them. And so that doesn't leave too much flexibility. So we started after the discovery and looking at the existing building evaluation. And this is the existing site plan. We have over 13 different additions to the building, which leads obviously to some challenges in terms of the connectivity and meeting some of those goals that we talked about as drivers. The average age of the building is about 54 years a square foot. So we have some areas that are newer, but there are a lot of areas that really are largely untouched. The segmentation of the building really creates some security challenges. We have a lot of doors. We don't have a lot of supervision of those areas. And so there's some challenges there, and there always will be some challenges in that building. So we took a step back. We looked at the broader site. The site has about a third of the number of acres as is recommended by the more regional kind of buildings and campuses. This, you can see the orange line that goes around it is the existing property. You can see how the site really spreads out into the community. Those blue lines are where people are parking outside. So there's about almost 60% of the cars are parked off campus on the street. And that really leads to, I would say that we've been very lucky. That leads to some safety concerns, and we've been fortunate at this time. But it really creates some challenges, especially with young drivers and snow. If we went up there today, we all know what that would look like. We don't have that many parking spaces today up there. We looked at site expansion. If we wanted to expand that 17 acres, we're really looking at, by the time we purchase property and then start to redevelop it, we're looking at almost $1.5 million an acre to develop those areas. So whether we get to our goal or not, it's just very expensive to expand the opportunities on the site. We looked at the number of acres for new sites. Our 17 is there on the right. As I said, the proposed new high school is 50 with some option for some more if we think we need it. Ames is over 70 to Johnston at 125. So you can see the trend for our peer groups, at least around the Midwest, and certainly in Iowa, is really more to create those opportunities on site. This diagram shows the program distribution within the space. So this is the departments kind of organization of the building. You can see it's we talked about it being siloed. You can see how kind of scattered around it is. Very inflexible. We heard some comments or questions, I have at least in the community, about, well, this high school used to have more students in it than it does today. Why do we need more space? And as we start to evaluate it, about 20% of the building is used for programming that was non-existent when the building was built. So that's special needs and a slew of other kind of spaces, whether it's special programming, STEM kind of learning. There's a lot of the building that is used for different kind of purposes. And we're also teaching about 72 kind of sections of college courses, which obviously we weren't doing it at one time. So there are more demands on the building, so we want to see how those are impacted. The yellow in the slide that you see is really more newly renovated space, and what I mean by that is in the last 15 years. I think most people don't understand this. Most people see the front of the building as they come in and interact with it, but the back of it they do not. And really the fact is over the 75% of the area of the building needs significant renovation. So there are significant liabilities there and things that we need to deal with and just changing needs. There's about 26% of the building that's air conditioned now. Obviously that's something we'd like to deal with. We took a broader look at population growth in the city of Cedar Falls, and you can see a pretty steady incline there, and that's an old number of housing starts. I think it's that's a 17, 18 number of 271 housing starts. We're seeing growth, and we continue to see growth, and I would argue that probably that line is a little bit more vertical than it's shown there based on the development that we're seeing today. So population is changing. How that affects our school, this is the red is a projected population in the high school, and we're seeing somewhere in that 25 to 30% growth in the next decade. We've seen that come through the elementaries and the middle school, and we've responded to those demands. I think it's no secret to anyone that that is going to continue up to the high school, and that's what the projections are. And the gray line just shows if we don't do anything, we're going to have class sizes really in the 30 plus kind of range very soon. You're already seeing a portable, first portable at the high school, which is responding to some of that.
So that big jump in 1920, that's because you look at the map and we're not above, and then it seems like 1920 we changed the slope of the line, and that's our graduating class versus, call it our kindergarten class, or I guess our 9th grade class that's going to move into the high school.
Our biggest classes right now are in that middle school, upper elementary ranges. We're bringing in classes in that 430 to 450 range, and we're graduating classes in that 370 to 380 range. So over the next now several years, we're going to see those numbers grow at our high school level fairly significantly compared to what's currently there.
What's our kindergarten class? I mean, I know that's at the other side of the extreme, and maybe Pam, that's a
It's in that 440 range, I believe, right now, and I think our biggest section, biggest grade level in our district, I think, is at 6th grade right now, and I think that's about 465. So again, we know just transitionally we're going to have anywhere from 50 to 60 student growth just because of the graduating classes versus the kindergarten sections that we're bringing in. And that's exciting, but it means that we're having a larger group that's going to be coming into that high school building quickly. And right now it feels compressed and certainly tight in a lot of different ways because it doesn't meet the needs academically, but also for that teaching and learning component that we know are extremely important.
Good question. So let me go back. In 2012, there was a study done on how the existing building might be expanded, and we've updated those numbers to be consistent with some of the current needs and inflation costs. And so we've looked at those numbers, and Story Construction's provided some pricing on those. The building ultimately, with the additions and renovations, is projected to cost about 76% of a new building, and that's without any land development. So it pretty quickly, with some land expansion, that pretty quickly gets to the cost of a new building, or more, actually, if we talk about apples and apples. So those numbers are real, and so what we wanted to do is test really the new building as a comparison to that and see what that means.
I think it's extremely important to note, and as we saw by an earlier slide, with some of the newer high schools in the state of Iowa, when we looked at acreage, we are on the lower end of acreage, just with that new site of 50 acres. Waukee is about 100, Johnston is about 120 or 140 acres. Others are in that 70 to 80 range. I think it's important to note that if we compare apples to apples, when we look at trying to have a renovated current high school site and try to acquire additional land, it exceeds the cost of a new building quickly, and over almost about 20% over from what a new building would be on a site that has enough room to be able to accommodate the needs of not only students and staff, but our community as we look at some of those design drivers for co-collaboration and certainly helping this be a building for our community short-term and long-term.
It also has a real impact on learning, because that process, because of the renovation kind of needs, probably takes about 5 years to renovate. So we're really talking about almost 2 classes going through that process completely while renovation is happening. And that certainly has an impact on what we do and the cost of how we do it. So Janelle talked about this slide. We wanted to look broadly at the historical context of, this is a 1950 development map with the red area showing the primary development in 1950, and the red box to the side is where the existing high school site is. So really we were building on the edge in 1950. As we go to the next slide, that is the current day kind of really development, and that's last year. We all know that it's changed a little bit since then even, and where the high school is. And then projected, you can see the yellow star is the new high school location proposed. That really, while it's on the edge today, is not going to be for long. As we reach our eastern kind of border is stopped, our northern border is stopped in some ways for development, and then our southern border is really pretty much fixed as well. at Highway 20. So the city is going to go west long-term here. So in 2014, Fielding Nair International, which is an international educational design firm, did some space programming to decide what we needed for space, and it was really informing some of that previous study and the new study as well. It's a starting point and it's an assumption. We've got a lot of work to do if this was to move forward in terms of development and meetings with staff and the community about what all those things are. But it's a guideline, and we've started to look also at how that relates to other high schools. And so you can see some square feet per student numbers. We're at about 211 square feet per student right now. And that, you can see that the new Ames High School that's being designed now is about 240, and then it goes all the way down to about 187. If we looked at our existing, it is way off the right end of the chart as we look at comparisons to peer groups.
I think that's where it gets really kind of intriguing and interesting when you start looking at the square footage. So this is really high-level components as we just look at how much square footage is necessary per student to be able to have those experiences educationally for learning for our students and staff. And you know, I think it goes back to a slide Brad discussed earlier. Do we want an updated, newer version of today, or do we want something that really is innovative that allows us the flexibility into the future? And that's where those additional 2 to 3 to 4 square foot per student come into play, as far as having those adaptable, flexible spaces that accommodate whole group learning, large group learning, hands-on learning opportunities that really epitomizes what we know is going to be important as we look to the future, which our current facility does not allow, because everything is added on and kind of not real well aligned, and double load-bearing classroom walls that don't allow for expansion except very expensively. So it's something that we know what we need for the future to be able to accommodate our students, our staff, and their needs, which is extremely important. And sometimes that 2 to 3 extra square foot per student makes a significant difference. And you can see some districts that are just past bond issues and referendums in their community are up there much higher than that, because they understand the direction that education's going.
So you might ask, well, why do we need more square feet per student? And I think as we start to look at how learning is changing, the more collaborative learning, hands-on learning that Andy's talking about, takes a little bit more space. Now, this slide that we're looking at here looks at the efficiency of that space. So the bar on the left, the red space is basically kind of core academic spaces. Those are spaces for learning. The gray area is, you might consider that corridors and mechanical rooms and spaces that aren't going to be used for learning. So the bar on the left, the vertical bar, is the existing high school. You see it's about 63% efficient in terms of space. There's a lot of corridors that are just used for passing through. If we look on the far right, the existing high school with additions and renovations can become slightly more efficient at 64%. But you can see the total bar is how big the building is to get the space that's needed. And we're well over 300,000 square feet, about 325, I think, total. And then if you look at the middle bar, that looks at how efficient a new building could be in terms of the educational space that we need. So what we're saying is that we can accommodate learning in a new building much more efficiently than we can with additions and renovations to the existing building, and get much more space. We can get the same amount of learning space in a smaller footprint than we can in the existing building due to some of those inefficiencies.
I would assume that cramming more students into an older building too also raises more safety concerns. That you've talked about exits and that sort of thing that we could patrol, but just the issue of having so many students per classroom is also another safety issue. Is that right?
Absolutely, and it's really, we're going to talk about that in the conceptual kind of diagrams, but even supervisory kind of pieces are really important they're just almost impossible in the existing building to, I mean, you have areas that are not supervised. As much as we want, staff out in the hallway kind of looking over people, it's kind of a maze, and that's going to happen when a building is added on to 15 times. So there are some real challenges there, and we're going to talk about those in the new diagram.
And I think one of the significant challenges too, when you look at adding on to a building that has had 13 additions and renovations to it, you start looking at interior rooms that have no natural light. And we know research studies have proven that natural light significantly impacts learning and the environment of a classroom. So it's important to be able to denote. You look at the number of interior rooms, the number of interior hallways would significantly go up versus what we currently have, which is a large number within that building. So that's important to know too, not only safety and security, but just that environment, that space within the building.
So we started to look at some real diagrams. So to your question, Jeff, I think Cedar Falls High School right now is a big lump of students, right? That's scattered about in it. The goal in a new building would be to start to think about a school within a school, that there are some small learning communities in that area. So we might break that 1,400 students down instead of being one mass, and this diagram on the left is intended to think about that. But we might think about that as kind of smaller groups, that we might have a small learning community of maybe 350 kids and have 4 of those in the building. And in a new space, we can start to think about how those areas are organized and supervised and secure from a security point of view, how they can be compartmentalized in a much more meaningful way than at the existing building. The diagram on the right is really about, we've talked about as we went through the programming about these social spaces, the creative spaces and academic spaces, and then how those kind of relate to this community space. And the diagram coming up here, we'll talk about that a little more specifically. This is an overhead view of the site that the district owns. And the Unidome, you can see as a reference there to the right. It's 50 acres right now, adjacent to athletic fields of UNI. So from a building, we did this diagram early on, and it was really about, we were intrigued with the idea when we talked to the community about power hour and how that works. It's really a unique kind of piece in the PLCs, the professional learning communities. And we were interested in the idea of how that might maybe be more than it is today, because as we heard from everyone, it's a great idea that's really limited a lot by the building in terms of what that can mean. So we started to think about the first floor of this building being a creative commons, a social commons, and a community commons, and how these pieces can kind of come together as a very strong kind of social center for the building in terms of organization. And then the academic areas are on upper levels that are broken down in some of those small learning communities. So these diagrams are really just vignettes of some of the areas. This is the lower level, which is the community wing of the building, and that houses the music wing, kind of gymnasium and athletics, and then some of the support spaces associated with it.
And I think it's important to denote that this really is kind of a test of square footage that, we had a committee of board members, of different individuals that went through to look at different scenarios. So this is not design schematics. If the bond issue's successful, that's a 12-month process, getting parents and students and staff and community members involved through this. This is a test of square footage. Does this work to at least give us kind of renditions of what's been done in other buildings, other districts, other high schools across the state, across the region, really across the Midwest in a lot of different ways. But is this something that could happen here, and what does that mean then for us to meet our needs and meet our goals as we look long term?
Right. It's really about what's possible.
Yep.
It's not about what is necessarily, so we don't want to dig in too much, and these are high level for that reason. So we do have some vignettes of what some of those spaces might look like. Again, it's not design, but we're starting to think about those duplication of spaces. So in this scenario, we're envisioning a track that after school maybe serves community and athletics, but during the day acts as a corridor, and maybe even some learning spaces for physical education. So dual use kinds of spaces, more flexible kind of seating and how that happens in the main gymnasium. The main level of the building, with the entrance kind of at the arrow there, you can start to see that spline that goes through the building that is that social kind of commons, with the community commons to the right and the creative commons to the left. Again, trying to pull all those pieces together around the Learning Resource Center, which is in the blue there, and really focusing entrances to really two. We have a community entrance, student entrance, and maybe a staff entrance. And that's going to be pulled down to one after school's open, so we can really control. So this is one shot down that kind of spine. Again, not designed, but can we develop this two-story commons that might serve and support the power hour in many ways. So this is a cafeteria, but it's also learning space during the day for different groups to come out and do different things. Again, it's meant to be flexible space. We've made the corridors a bit wider so they're not just corridors, so that they can be used for learning spaces. This is an area that rethinks we're calling it the Creative Commons, but it's really about what is STEM programming, foods, what do all those kinds of hands-on learning kind of environments look like, and what is the spaces kind of in between that can be collaborative areas that can be really connected to those classrooms very strongly, but also can be separated if they need to be.
And I know we said this at a previous meeting, probably 3 meetings ago, when we've interviewed kids, talked to our students at the high school level. Why do you come to the high school early? What causes you to come early in the morning before classes start? And you hope the answer is because of opportunity to collaborate, opportunities for energy and excitement that draws me to that building early in the morning. The answer that currently they give you is parking. We come here to park so we don't have to walk 3 to 5 to sometimes 6 blocks to get into the building. We come here out of necessity, not out of necessarily desire, because it's not an inviting space. It's not a space that energizes and engages individuals, and we know that's an important piece. Kids want to collaborate, kids want to work, and that's classic of our CAPS program. You have a snow day, you have a day off. Our CAPS students are going into business and industry on their own because of that energizing aspect. We know we can replicate that in a building that draws in 1,400 students to have those same experiences.
Yeah, so that's what spaces like this are meant to do. They're meant to capture that CAPS excitement that we're seeing. That's engaged learning. How do we bring that into the other programming that's going on in the schools? This is one of the upper level academic wings, and really you don't need to read all the details because I know you can't, but it's really about two kind of ends of the building, and those are those small learning communities. And I'm gonna, this actually goes down. That's the kind of spine where everything comes together. This is one of those learning communities on the upper levels, and there's 4 of these. And the idea is that you can see on the left side the professional learning community and how that engages with this academic kind of multi-purpose space in the middle. And it's how it's supervised. This area would be able to be locked down from a security point of view, so we can start to compartmentalize the building and not have it be a free-for-all. And then these classrooms open up and have some transparency into this space to provide that. If you go back to those drivers of connectedness, how we connect the individual spaces that exist today, community and co-location, how do these spaces get used, maybe even after hours or before school, and then a diversity of types of spaces. We have a lot of spaces that aren't just the white boxes, right, that we have now. So we have looked at some costs for the new high school. Right now, construction, this is really a comparison of the redeveloped option to the new. And you can see kind of those comparisons. Construction cost is about $67 million, plus project costs for the redevelopment option, about $86 for the new high school. The potential bond kind of estimate has been looked at and estimated to be about $69.9 million for the bond referendum if we were going to pursue the new option. And I think one of the things to highlight is we've been talking about this for a while. We're experiencing or have experienced about $3.3 million in inflation every year that we pause. So there is really a cost of doing nothing. we know that we need to do something, and that cost is important.
And I think it's important to note on that slide as well that when you look down at the top section, again, if you compare apples to apples, that 50-acre site to redevelop the current high school, that's where it comes into about 118% of what a new building could be, and you would hope it would be for the sake of the next 50 years. And we know that if you just do the project cost for that redevelopment of the existing high school, the 84.4, that's really about a 15-year vision. And after that, we are over capacity within that building, and the site does not allow for any more expansion. That site is fixed. So you have to invest in additional acreages and additional site expansion, and that's where it becomes untenable just because of the cost and access to that site.
And that's assuming that you'd be able to even acquire all of that land too, right? Which,
yes, and that becomes a challenge, that becomes difficult, that becomes emotional, that becomes just really a hard component when you look at that, and something that I'm not sure anybody would come out of that feeling positive or certainly optimistic just because of what that process looks like.
So this is one of our last slides, and it's really just a side-by-side comparison of some of the important pieces for each of the options and whether they meet those goals or not. So you can talk about student collaboration areas. We don't really have a lot of that in the existing building. We can achieve some of that in the high school and certainly in the new high school. Security, so the big story here is that there are some things that we can address if we wanted to pursue the redevelopment, addition, and renovation of the high school, but there are many that just aren't going to be possible in that option either. So really just wanted to look at that and give a side-by-side comparison. So I've talked long enough, probably.
So you mentioned that like one of the, call it a negative perception was, there's fewer high school students in the high school today. Why isn't there enough capacity? I'm just curious. I mean, often in this we end up preaching to the choir a lot of times. So I'm just curious from a community standpoint, what other, call it negative perceptions, have you run into as far as considering the new high school?
Well, I think there's a question of what do we do with the old high school, right? What do we do with the existing high school? That's a question certainly that's on people's minds, and bless you. We have done some studies for redevelopment options there, taking part of the building down and having some redevelopment and some consolidation of school facilities, possibly in the buildings that have some life. There are parts of the building that do have some life, and there are certainly sections in the back that should be taken down. There's possibilities for redeveloping some of that land behind if we keep this stuff in front. So those are community conversations, again, that really need to be had very broadly, but there are options on the table that can fill the good parts of that building, in my opinion.
And I think we heard some, those concerns that came out from the survey, which we'll share the results here coming up at a future board meeting. Very positive. So what we heard back from that survey was a lot of those positive comments that talked about, now is the time that we need to move forward educationally. We understand that there's needs. We understand that there's some challenges. So I think there are some of those areas that we need to address, some of those questions that come up. But also I think there's quite a bit of excitement out there about what is the potential possibility and what this can mean, not only for education across our community, but I think a lot of people, and it came through in the survey, feel that this is not only beneficial for the district, but beneficial for the community as a whole, as seen as an economic driver, seen as something that allows and excites businesses to say this is where we want to grow, because families want to live here, families want to raise their children here because of the educational quality, accoutrements across the community. But a high school site right now is limiting some of that excitement. The future potential gets people really energized.
I would say the other one, Jeff, that I think we'd be remiss if we ignore it is the cost. Obviously, it's a big number. I think the story that we've tried to tell in this study, and what we found in this study, is that the cost of doing nothing is high, and the cost of doing something on the existing site is really high. I live in a house that's 104 years old, and spent a lot of money on it. And you know, there's a time when enough's enough, and where you turn away. And the cost of staying there is also high, and I think people need to look at that kind of realistically. What other things are you guys hearing?
Other comments?
I had a question. You showed that one graph with a line, projected growth of population in Cedar Falls. Given the fact that the current high school site is landlocked, to the extent you can kind of confidently look into the future, how big a high school could we actually, how many students, if you will, what would the enrollment be that we could still have a fully functioning new high school on that 50-acre site 35, 45 years from now?
You're talking about the new site or the existing site?
The new site.
The new site? So the diagram that we're showing really has room to grow at least to 2,000, probably. Not that we would get there, but we want to plan for some of that. At that point, most schools will look at other options anyway, for whether it's a second high school or a specialty high school. And I'm not saying we're going to get to there, but you know, we see that 2,000 number is a pretty common kind of threshold for people to evaluate how big is too big. So we certainly have room to get to that point, which we feel pretty confident about.
Thank you.
I think the question's a really good question. It's an in-depth question when you start talking about planning for a new building, and especially when you start looking at those common areas. And you know, you talk about 2 to 3 square foot extra per student. Knowing that we're growing, knowing we're going to continue to grow as a community with what's happening residentially and certainly economically, we want those common spaces to be sized appropriately so they don't feel tight when we grow to a 1,600 building or a 17 or an 1,800 student building. So those common spaces sized appropriately, knowing that we can expand the site if necessary based on the concept that we know we would have as an end product coming out of design development. Similar to what we've done at elementary buildings. We've thoughtfully thought those through so there can be additions added on so it doesn't come about as segmented when you look at the overall building or the design of the building 10, 15, 20 years after it was built.
Yeah, usually high schools are limited growth by the common spaces. So we're trying to size some of those common spaces more appropriately to handle more than the 1,400 students so that we can just add classrooms basically. Because that's really what kills schools usually, is the common areas. You know, how many kids can we feed at lunch? Those are big issues, and we can't ignore those. So, one question Janelle whispered to me was about security. We talk about that in a lot of different ways, but certainly we have tornado safe areas, and all those things would be incorporated in a new building as well. And the existing building is actually not that bad, except that they're kind of a long way to get to some of those areas. There's plenty of basements there.
And after our renovation of Orchard Hill and North Cedar, the high school will be the only building that does not have that secured entrance, where you have to go through a vestibule into the office area prior to getting access into the rest of the building. So all of our buildings will have that, with the exception of the high school, and we know the number of exterior doors within our high school does not allow us to be able to have that design, just because we do have exterior spaces that students go out to during the school day to learn, and that's how the building was built, how the building was designed, and it's something that can't be corrected.
I continue to hear and see people asking about College Square Mall as a possibility, and you know, for redevelopment as a high school. I know that's been looked at in the past just as a point of comparison between different options. Maybe if you could just speak to what's been looked at in the past. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much
No,
about
that's
that.
all right. I hear that question a lot too, and certainly an underutilized facility in our community, at the heart of our community. The reality is that the site isn't big enough. It's about 30-some acres, and it's also really expensive. If you looked at the per acre cost of that land, it'd be significant. I can't remember We're 1.25 million, or less than that, I think, for the 50 acres west of UNI. That number is going to be much bigger if we start to look at them all.
And that's in the presentation that I think we gave 2 or 3 years ago as we talked through that purchase of the land, and we used that mall as a comparison study. We used Sartori, the current Sartori, because there is a plan that was in place to look at a new hospital, and we also looked at where that hospital would go as far as land. And what we determined was the mall site, just because of the assessed valuation and the cost. The 30 acres that Brad mentioned actually includes the brand new Hy-Vee, a lot of the really thriving businesses right along University, Panera Bread, and some of those other, which are included within that site. Then you look at the cost-prohibited nature of trying to take out all of the hard spaces, the parking lots, to be able to make sure we had the green spaces necessary that you have to have around a school building because of all your co-curricular, extracurricular programs with band and vocal, or not vocal, but band that uses those green spaces outside. You just can't accommodate that and have that happen, let alone trying to turn them all into a school. It becomes so cost prohibitive. The current Sartori site, I know we did a study on that too, and that is such a segmented building as well, with small spaces, load-bearing walls, that you can't really justify expanding that into a footprint that allows for 21st century learning environments and opportunities for students, and it becomes so cost prohibitive. We looked at locations outside of our community even further, and then when you started to talk about trying to run utilities out of those, it became such a cost-prohibitive venture. We know that this is right now on the outskirts of our community, but as Brad mentioned, in 1953, when the current high school was built, that was on the edge of a farm field. And people recall that and remember that was the edge of town, and now you can see what has happened over the last 70 years. So we know that this is a growing, thriving community, and certainly one that has been based on innovation a lot, and this is something that would continue to push that forward, we believe. And that growth around that new site would expand considerably. And I think if you note Aldrich as an example, you will see how quickly infill occurs because people certainly want to be around school buildings and see that as very enticing.
I just wanted to make a comment about efficiencies too, which you didn't cover explicitly here, but in thinking about energy efficiency and food production efficiencies, have calculations been made that provide a projection on the cost savings to the district over the long term with a new building with those kinds of efficiencies in place?
Yeah, I would say we haven't done comprehensive kind of studies, but we know that even from an energy point of view, there's at least $50,000 to $100,000 in savings every year, just in energy savings over the existing building.
With fully air conditioned in the new building versus?
Yes, exactly. So we're air conditioning 26% of the building today. If we air conditioned the entire building with a more efficient system, a new building, we're going to spend $50,000 to $100,000, which is a teacher, right? That's real money every year. So we haven't done an extensive life cycle cost analysis, but for sure there are significant savings there. What we found in many schools that we've completed is that we can air condition the new buildings for at least the same or less cost than just heating the older buildings. Mm-hmm. And then we haven't talked about sustainable measures. I mean, that's another level of discussion that we haven't gotten to yet, but certainly there's some sustainability kind of questions there and issues that we want to look at very seriously if we go down that road.
And we're so ripe for those conversations, as we know, with you and I right next to us within that location, as well as Cedar Falls Utilities and their forward-thinking concepts and ideas, and there's so many synergistic opportunities there.
And as Sasha pointed, one of the things she said was food and opportunities for improved food service in the district with an updated kitchen and those kind of things. So,
yeah, I would say that's something we didn't talk about, but this assumes a more robust central kitchen for the district, and so some of those area numbers and even some of the cost numbers are a little bit higher because of that kind of really district need to deal with that issue. So that's driving some of those pieces as well.
And what we find too in more current high schools across the state, across the region, is more of a decentralized kitchen concept, where just instead of a large common area where students go and eat in the cafeteria, sometimes it's more pushed out within those learning communities. And you think about, how do we eat? A lot of times we eat over a collaboration time where we're sitting talking, 3 to 5 people, and our students in this day and age do a lot of grab and go. So they like to be able to have something that they can do, go to a kiosk, maybe purchase a sandwich and a coffee or a soft drink, and then can go to a small learning community and be able to eat and be able to collaborate and talk, where maybe our staff members are at with Power Hour. There's so many opportunities and unlimited potential that we have healthy options, but also options and drivers that allow students to be more opportunistic about having food on campus, because it's more decentralized in a lot of different locations. And that is really kind of a neat concept as we look at that Starbucks concept, where that's where our students really are comfortable within those seating arrangements to be able to, again, further their dialogue and further their collaboration and further their learning as they're sitting there having those conversations. We hope that will be a driver for our community, because we know we have so many experts in our community that we might be able to utilize that within those learning concepts. And it's just really a unique opportunity and a neat opportunity as we look at the future.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that very much, but I think one of the driving factors for me about looking seriously at the new building option is that the existing building was constructed in a way that just isn't very adaptable. Most of the walls that are there are bearing walls. It'd be very difficult to make that something different. And so the new building really we don't know what the future of education looks like. We know it's changing rapidly, and the technology's impact on that. So we have a fairly, traditional, we've had a departmental kind of model of education for quite a while in this district. What does that look like a decade from now? To me, it could look different. It could look, it could be more topic-based. It could be project-based learning. It could be a lot of these kinds of things. And as I look at the existing building and the inflexibility of it, we're going to have really struggles to adapt to that over time. And we can build a building today much more adaptable in terms of structurally, so that we can make some of those changes down the road. So that, I think, is a really important kind of issue for people to think about, is what is this? And we're building a building that's going to last for probably 70 years or more. And if we do it right, it can adapt over that time. We haven't had that luxury, and we don't have that luxury with the existing building. Not in an economical way, anyway.
Any other comments or questions?
I would say next steps, we're going to be going out to the community.
Okay.
And reaching out and interacting with this presentation and continuing the community discussion that we started with a year ago. It's not over. This is not a final thing. As Andy said, we're going to continue to adapt, and we have a lot of work to do to test it. But really, the next step is about, let's hear from the community on some of the things that we've brought to the table, and it's their building, and so we want this to reflect the Cedar Falls way and the future of education in Cedar Falls. So it's their building. We want some input from them moving forward here.
That's great. Great presentation.
Those opportunities for community conversation will be forthcoming and posted maybe on the website, I assume, and
Correct.
that kind of thing? Yeah.
And we'll present them here so they can go out on Channel 15 to make sure that we hit a wide range of community constituents, because that's important for us.
Great.
And Janelle, remind me, I thought I heard during your presentation that you have some of these questions that we just asked on that website right now. I think there was a comparison on land, and I know that we've answered the question regarding the mall, so that's on there. So another way to communicate with our community is give them guidance to go and maybe peruse through some of that information too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
All right, moving on to the acceptance of the Pete Junior High portable bid.
Yes, and that is me. And there's a PowerPoint slide to be able to pull up, to be able to look at. As we know, we are growing, and that growth is coming through not only our elementaries, but junior highs, as we previously talked. One of those areas of growth that we're seeing is at Pete Junior High. So this is a process that we've gone through. We've gone through the public hearing. We've gone through the setting of the specifications and plans. We did receive bids here within the last week, and you'll see some of this presentation that not only we gave a couple meetings ago, but then just kind of to refresh and update. Portable would be there out towards East Searly Boulevard. We had a portable there during the renovation of Pete Junior High, so this had some of the substructures that were there, as well as the location to other utilities is beneficial. On the next slide, you can see that we went through. We had 3 bidders that bid on this project. You can see that this was up on top, the estimates that we had for the overall project cost. The low bid that came in was from Peters Construction, and you can see that was roughly $48,000 under our estimates. I think the logical question is why, and I think a couple different reasons. This portable is coming from Orchard Hill. The company that's working on Orchard Hill is Peters Construction, so they have knowledge of the site, knowledge of how to remove those portables, but also we built these estimates on the last portable that we moved, and that was to the high school, and that had a little bit more challenge with location, a little more challenge with some of the utilities. So the cost estimates were based on that, so they came in much lower because of those factors. I think the other major factor is timing. When you have different bidders that bid a project, and having 3 for something like this was very positive for us. That is, I think, shown and reflective within that 48,000 under our estimate. The other aspect of this, we recommend the alternative 1, which is $39.93 to refeed some of the low voltage systems because of timing and because of some of those other needs there at that site, and that's something that can be done that we can't do. So I think the next slide is really any questions. Our recommendation is to approve Peters for that portable project at Pete Junior High and to accept that 48,000 under budget bid.
Do I have a motion to approve the portable bid?
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School Board of Education approve the low bid from Peters Construction of Waterloo, Iowa, including alternate number 1, for a total of $125,114 for the Pete Junior High School portable relocation project.
Thank you, Sasha. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, Dr. Petit, can you kind of give us I mean, every time we move one of these, we have the expense and kind of what's the global plan. We talked about the high school, the fact that class sizes are getting larger. Is this a permanent portable at Pete Junior High?
No, that would not be the case. We know we have other facility needs, which is going to be perpetuated over time. And as we've talked and started the dialogue here at this table, we know that we have pools with the previous bond that was passed in Cedar Falls Community School District, besides the elementary that was done in 2016, was 1976, and that was for the construction of the pools at our junior highs. So those are now 43 years old and going to quickly approach their life cycle span. Those are spaces that we understand and know can be utilized for classroom spaces as we look out 2 to 3 years because of their square footage, their ceiling heights, and just the areas that we can grow into. So as we look at a new high school site, trying to earmark a square footage allotment or a space allotment for a future pool center is something that we know we need to do, because our junior highs, as we look at long-term needs, are going to have additional square footage, classroom expectations, especially as we continue to grow, and those are areas that we know would be utilized for that.
Any other questions or comments? vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on now to the superintendent's report.
Yes, a couple different things that I wanted to just to note. Number one, inclement weather process and delays. We have had some very interesting weather. We've gone from ice to snow to freezing cold wind chills to unbelievable weather situations. And that's always a kind of a tenuous process, as everybody can imagine, but we always go through, first off, the focus on student safety. How do we ensure that we keep our students and staff safe, make sure that we're watching all the weather conditions? There's so many different variables involved with those decisions as you look at icy conditions and fog conditions or just the cold temperature conditions. And so it's hard to be able to say specifically when and how and what, but we communicate fully with a wide variety of people, area superintendents, other leaders across the Cedar Valley, sometimes individuals within the works department, just to make sure that we're making wise decisions as we look at the weather. We do know that we watch the air temperatures closely. If they drop in that negative 14 to negative 15 degree area, that's when we worry about buses gelling and diesel fuel not flowing through our buses. And then we look really at that minus 30 to 32 degree wind chill temperatures as that threshold for when you could actually get hypothermia and you could get other issues with students waiting in bus lines. So those are kind of our temperature thresholds, but then there's so many other considerations when you think about drifting and snow amount and road conditions and icy conditions that go into those factors as well. So I just want to let the community know, our board know that those are thoughtful when we go through those processes with a lot of dialogue with other districts, but certainly time consuming, and we try to make those as timely as possible for parents to make adjustments because we know it is an interruption to their daily schedules and daily lives.
When we choose to have school and a parent's situation is a little different, they don't feel that it's safe for their student to attend school, what are our considerations then?
We always let parents know their first priority is their own children, and we understand that as parents, as school board members, and we always say, if you believe that it's better to keep your child at home on a day that we do have school because of your beliefs of safety concerns, we encourage you to keep them home on those days. And there are some unique circumstances. You know, there are times where we might have school, but there's one rural road that we're not able to get down with a bus because it's in a unique situation or a unique area, and we might not be able to pick up 2 or 3 children from 1 or 2 houses, and we make sure that they understand we're making these decisions for the collective whole because there's some situations that are unique, and some parents that will say, this does not feel safe and I feel best keeping my children at home, and we are very comfortable with that.
Good question.
Very good question. The other items that I have down, February 11th, we have an information report of computer science. Mr. Brian Unruh will be here with some of their staff. February 25th, we're looking at our science department to be here. That could vary a little bit with some other items that we have on that agenda, but we know it's important as we look at the rollout of our next generation science standards and the impact that that has collectively. And I'd also denote that within the packet is the framework, or at least a starting framework for our 1920 school calendar. That is something that we go through a public hearing on. We have to go through an approval process, so it takes about 3 different meetings by the time we set a public hearing, hold a public meeting, and then act on the calendar. I just wanted to get that out there so people could start seeing that. We are bound in a lot of ways by state code when it comes to calendars, so we don't have a lot of choice and selection as we once did, but we cannot start before August 23rd, and that is a Friday. As you look at this, we start on the 26th with this preliminary calendar. That's the same date that Waterloo is planning to start, Cedar Valley Catholic is planning to start, UNI starts on that date. I did not look up Hawkeye, but I believe they're within that framework as well. So we're trying to balance this with regionalization as well as looking at ways that we can be more like with other districts and dislike other districts. So just wanted to put that in there so you could start reviewing that as we go through that process, because it will be March when we look at approving that as we go through all the different components.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to go into closed session?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education enter into closed session to discuss the purchase or sale of particular real estate only where premature disclosure could be reasonably expected to increase the price the governmental body would have to pay for that property or reduce the price the governmental body would receive for that property. The minutes and the audio recording of a session closed under this paragraph shall be available for public examination when the transaction discussed is completed under 2011 Iowa Code 21.5 LJ.
Thank you, Jenny. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Yep. Ms. Coyle?
Yes?
Mr. Giddens?
Yes.
Mr. Hessman?
Yes.
Ms. Leeper?
Yes.
Mr. Orvis?
Yes.
Ms. Walpert?
Yes.
All right. We're moving into, we're going to move into a closed session, so we're going to leave this room. We're going to go back into this back room, and when we come out, there will be no action except for us to adjourn.